Have you ever looked in the mirror and suddenly felt like you've aged overnight? Not because of wrinkles or gray hair, but because something in your eyes, your posture, your entire presence seems tired, worn down, older than your years. Here's the truth that nobody talks about. Aging isn't just about the passing of time. It's about the habits we unconsciously adopt that make us look, feel, and act older than we truly are. And the most dangerous part? We don't even notice we're doing it. Today, we're going to explore 9 subtle but powerful habits that are stealing your vitality, your radiance, and your joy, making you appear decades older than you actually are. But more importantly, I'm going to show you exactly how to eliminate each one of them. Because true youth isn't about your age, it's about how you choose to live. Stay with me until the end, because the 9th habit is the one that almost everyone overlooks, and it might be the most transformative revelation you'll hear today. Welcome to the Heart Code, where we unlock the deepest truths about relationships, psychology, and the human heart. I'm so grateful you're here with me today, because what we're about to discuss isn't just about looking younger. It's about reclaiming the energy, enthusiasm, and authentic self that life sometimes tries to bury under layers of responsibility, disappointment, and exhaustion. If this is your first time here, you've found a community of thoughtful, growth-oriented individuals who believe that it's never too late to transform your life. And if you're returning, welcome back. Your presence here means everything. Before we dive deep into today's content, I want to ask you for something small but incredibly meaningful. If you find value in what we discuss today, if even one insight resonates with you or shifts your perspective, please take a moment to like this video. Your like tells YouTube that this content matters, and it helps us reach more people who need to hear these truths. Leave a comment below sharing which habit resonates most with you, or tell me about your own experience with aging gracefully. I read every single comment, and your stories inspire not just me, but everyone in this community. Share this video with someone you love, someone who might need this reminder that youth is a choice we make every single day. Subscribe to the Heart Code and turn on notifications so you never miss our conversations about living with authenticity, purpose, and heart. And if you really want to support this channel and help us continue creating content that transforms lives, consider showing your appreciation with super thanks. Every contribution, no matter how small, allows us to keep bringing you these deep, meaningful conversations. Your support makes all the difference. Now, let's talk about something that the renowned psychotherapist and author Jorge Bucay has spent decades helping people understand. Aging, he tells us, isn't primarily a physical phenomenon. Yes, our bodies change with time, that's inevitable and natural, but the aging that truly diminishes us, the aging that makes us look and feel old before our time, happens in our minds, in our hearts, in the daily choices we make without even realizing it. These choices become habits. These habits become our identity, and before we know it, we've become someone we don't recognize, someone who looks in the mirror and wonders, when did I become so old? Habit 1. Complaining about everything. The first habit that ages you faster than almost anything else is constant complaining. Listen carefully to this because it's profound. Complaining doesn't just reflect a negative mindset, it creates one. And a negative mindset doesn't just affect how you feel, it literally changes how you look. When you complain, your facial muscles contract in specific patterns. Your forehead furrows, your mouth turns downward, your eyes narrow. Do this enough times, thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, and these expressions become etched into your face as permanent lines and wrinkles. But the physical aging is actually the least of your problems. Jorge Bucay teaches us that complaining is a form of victimhood. When we complain, we're essentially saying, "The world is happening to me, and I have no power to change it." This victim mentality is one of the most aging perspectives a person can adopt because it robs you of your agency, your power, your vitality. Think about the chronically unhappy people you know, the ones who complain about the weather, about politics, about their neighbors, about the traffic, about the economy, about everything and everyone. Now picture their faces. Do they look young? Do they radiate energy and enthusiasm? Or do they look tired, bitter, worn down by a world they've decided is against them? Here's what happens when complaining becomes your default mode. You train your brain to focus on what's wrong. By neuroscience has shown us that the brain has something called negativity bias, which means we're naturally more attuned to negative information than positive. It's an evolutionary adaptation that helped our ancestors survive by being alert to threats. But when you add constant complaining to this already existing bias, you create a mental loop that sees problems everywhere. Every situation becomes a potential source of dissatisfaction. Every person becomes someone who might disappoint you. Every day becomes a challenge to endure rather than an opportunity to embrace. And here's the tragic irony. The more you complain, the more you find to complain about. It's not that your life is getting worse, it's that you're training yourself to notice everything that's wrong while overlooking everything that's right. This makes you not just look old, but feel old. Because youth isn't about your chronological age, it's about your sense of possibility, your enthusiasm for life, your belief that good things can and will happen. Complaining kills all of that. Let me tell you about Maria, a woman I once knew who was 45 but looked 60. She complained about everything. Her job was terrible. Her husband didn't appreciate her. Her children were ungrateful. The government was corrupt. The world was going downhill. Every conversation with her was exhausting because it was just a litany of grievances. But the interesting thing was, objectively, her life wasn't that bad. She had a stable job, a faithful husband, healthy children, a comfortable home. But she couldn't see any of it because she'd trained her brain to focus exclusively on what was wrong. And it showed in every line of her face, in the heaviness of her movements, in the tired resignation in her eyes. Now contrast that with another woman I knew, actually 70 years old, who radiated youthfulness. She had faced real hardships, genuine tragedies, significant losses, but she didn't complain. She acknowledged difficulties, yes. She felt sadness when it was appropriate. But she didn't dwell in complaint. Instead, she focused on what she could control, what she could improve, what she could be grateful for. And the difference between these two women wasn't their circumstances. It was their habits of thought. So how do you eliminate the habit of complaining? First, you have to become aware of it. Most chronic complainers don't even realize how much they complain because it's become so automatic, so start paying attention. Maybe even ask someone close to you, "Do I complain a lot?" And be prepared for an honest answer. Once you're aware, implement what I call the complaint replacement technique. Every time you catch yourself about to complain, pause, take a breath. Then reframe the complaint as either a solution-focused statement or a gratitude statement. For example, instead of complaining, "This weather is terrible, it's so hot," you might say, "It's a hot day, I'm going to make sure I stay hydrated and find some shade." Or instead of "My job is so stressful and my boss is impossible," you might say, "Work is challenging right now, what's one thing I can do today to make it more manageable?" Or even, "Despite the stress, I'm grateful to have employment and income." Notice the difference? The situation hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. And that changes everything. This doesn't mean pretending problems don't exist or forcing fake positivity. It means choosing a response that empowers you rather than diminishes you. It means recognizing that while you can't control everything that happens, you can always control how you respond. And that sense of agency, that belief in your own power to influence your experience, is what keeps you young. Habit 2. Living in the past. The second habit that ages you prematurely is living in the past. And I want to be very clear about what this means, because there's a difference between remembering the past and living in it. Remembering is healthy. It's how we learn from experience, honor our journey, appreciate how far we've come. But living in the past means your emotional energy, your attention, your identity is stuck in a time that no longer exists. You're constantly comparing your present to your past, usually unfavorably. You're dwelling on regrets, on missed opportunities, on the person you used to be, or the life you used to have. Jorge Bucay has written extensively about how our relationship with time affects our well-being. He points out that people who age gracefully are those who can integrate their past without being imprisoned by it. They acknowledge where they've been, but they don't try to live there. Because here's the truth: the past is gone. It exists only in your mind as memory. And while memories can be beautiful, comforting, even instructive, they cannot and should not be your primary residence. When you live in the past, you age yourself in several devastating ways. First, physically, you neglect the present moment, which means you stop taking care of your current self. You stop exercising because you're not the athlete you used to be. You stop dressing well because you're not the size you used to be. You stop socializing because you don't have the energy you used to have. Everything becomes about what you used to be, and that comparison makes your present self seem diminished, less than old. Emotionally, living in the past keeps you stuck in grief. You're constantly mourning who you were, what you had, what you lost. This grief shows in your face, in your eyes, in the way you carry yourself. There's a heaviness to people who can't let go of the past. They move slowly, not because their bodies are old, but because they're carrying an invisible weight of nostalgia and regret. Mentally, living in the past prevents growth. You can't learn new things, develop new skills, form new relationships, or create new dreams when you're convinced that your best days are behind you. This stagnation is incredibly aging because growth is the essence of youth. Children and young people are constantly growing, changing, becoming. They're oriented toward the future, toward possibility, toward what they might become. When you reverse that orientation and focus only on what you were, you reverse the energy of youth. I want you to think about someone you know who constantly talks about the good old days. Maybe it's a relative who won't stop talking about how great things were in the 1960s or 70s, how music was better, people were kinder, life was simpler. Or maybe it's someone who peaked in high school or college and still identifies primarily as the person they were at 18 or 22. The cheerleader, the athlete, the popular one, the rebel. They're still mentally and emotionally living in that time, even though decades have passed. How do these people seem to you? Do they seem vibrant and alive, or do they seem stuck, static, old? Here's a painful truth: the more you glorify your past, the more you diminish your present and future. Because implicit in "I used to be" is the belief that I am no longer. I used to be beautiful becomes I am no longer beautiful. I used to be successful becomes I am no longer successful. I used to be happy becomes I am no longer happy. Can you see how devastating this is? You're literally telling yourself a story of decline, of loss, of endings. And that story makes you old. The alternative isn't to forget your past or pretend it didn't happen. The alternative is to integrate it, to see your past as chapters in an ongoing story, not as the whole book, to appreciate what was without needing it to be what is, to recognize that you've grown, changed, evolved, and that's not a loss, it's life. You are different now than you were at 20 or 30 or 40, and that's not tragic, that's natural and even beautiful if you allow it to be. Eliminating this habit requires a conscious shift in your temporal focus. Start by limiting how much time you spend reminiscing. If you find yourself constantly looking at old photos, talking about old times, comparing everything to how it used to be, set some boundaries. Reminisce consciously and occasionally, not constantly and automatically. When you do remember the past, remember it with gratitude for what it gave you, not with grief for what it took away. Second, actively create new experiences and memories. One reason people live in the past is because their present feels empty or uninspiring. So fill your present with meaning. Try something new, learn something, go somewhere you've never been, meet new people. Give yourself reasons to be excited about now and about what's coming, not just about what already happened. Third, practice what I call future-oriented language. Pay attention to how you talk about yourself and your life. Every time you catch yourself saying, "I used to," immediately follow it with, "and now I." For example, I used to love dancing, and now I'm exploring new ways to express myself creatively. Or I used to have so much energy, and now I'm learning to honor my body's current needs and rhythms. This simple linguistic shift keeps you connected to your present self and your ongoing journey. Finally, understand that nostalgia is often a symptom of unhappiness in the present. If you find yourself constantly escaping into memories, ask yourself, what's missing from my current life? What need was being met in the past that's not being met now? And then take action to meet that need in a way that's appropriate for who you are today. Maybe you miss the social connection you had in college. Great. How can you create meaningful connection now? Maybe you miss the sense of purpose you had in your career. Wonderful. How can you find or create purpose in this stage of your life? The past is not the only time you can feel fulfilled, alive, joyful. The present and future hold those possibilities too, if you're willing to reach for them. Habit 3. Neglecting your body. The third habit that ages you is neglecting your body, and this goes far beyond simple vanity. I'm not talking about the inevitable physical changes that come with age, the wrinkles, the gray hair, the shifts in your body composition. I'm talking about the conscious or unconscious choice to stop caring for your physical self, to stop moving, to stop nourishing yourself properly, to stop tending to your basic physical needs because you've decided, consciously or not, that it doesn't matter anymore. There's a particular form of resignation that happens to people as they age. A voice that whispers, "What's the point? I'm getting older anyway, so why bother exercising, eating well, dressing nicely, taking care of my skin?" This resignation is one of the most aging attitudes you can adopt because it's fundamentally a giving up. It's a surrender to the idea that your body is in decline and there's nothing you can do about it. And that's simply not true. Jorge Bucay has spoken about the mind-body connection and how our physical neglect is often a manifestation of emotional or psychological neglect. When we stop caring for our bodies, we're really saying we've stopped caring about ourselves. And that lack of self-care, that abandonment of ourselves, creates a cascade of aging effects that go far beyond the physical. Let me be specific about what body neglect looks like, because it's often subtle. It's not exercising at all, or if you do, doing it half-heartedly without any real intention or commitment. It's eating whatever is convenient rather than what nourishes you, fueling your body like it's a garbage disposal rather than a temple that houses your consciousness. It's staying up too late scrolling through your phone instead of getting the sleep your body desperately needs. It's wearing clothes that are comfortable but shapeless, that hide your body rather than honor it. It's letting your posture slouch, your shoulders round forward, your head hang down. It's skipping dental appointments, eye exams, health screenings because dealing with your physical health feels like too much effort. Each of these small neglects might seem insignificant on its own, but together they create a pattern of abandonment. You're essentially telling yourself through your actions that you're not worth the effort. You don't deserve to feel strong, healthy, vibrant. You don't deserve to take up space in the world with confidence and presence. And this message, repeated daily through countless small choices, doesn't just affect your body, it affects your entire sense of self. The physical effects are obvious. When you don't move your body, you lose muscle mass, bone density, flexibility, balance. Your metabolism slows, your energy decreases, your posture deteriorates. You become physically fragile and weak, which genuinely makes you old in the most literal sense. Poor nutrition accelerates cellular aging, creates inflammation, leads to weight gain or loss, affects your skin, hair, nails, everything. Lack of sleep disrupts every system in your body, from your immune function to your cognitive abilities to your emotional regulation. These aren't minor issues. They're the building blocks of premature aging, but the psychological effects might be even more damaging. When you neglect your body, you reinforce a self-concept of being old, unattractive, past your prime, not worth investing in. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You feel old, so you act old, so you become old. You avoid physical activities because you think you can't do them, which means you lose even more capacity, which confirms your belief that you can't do them. You avoid looking in mirrors or wearing clothes you love because you're ashamed of how you look, which means you never feel good about yourself, which means you care even less, which means you neglect yourself even more. It's a vicious cycle, and here's what breaks my heart. So many people, particularly women, they have been taught that caring about their physical appearance is vain or superficial or shallow, so they stop caring, thinking this makes them somehow more enlightened or less materialistic. But that's a tragic misunderstanding. Caring for your body isn't about conforming to beauty standards or trying to look young for others. It's about honoring the incredible vehicle that allows you to experience life. It's about maintaining the strength and health to do the things you love. It's about treating yourself with the same care and attention you'd give to something precious and valuable, because you are precious and valuable. Think about how you treat things you value. If you had an expensive car, you'd maintain it. If you had a beautiful garden, you'd tend it. If you had a cherished pet, you'd care for it. Why would you treat your own body, the only one you'll ever have, with less care than you'd give to possessions or animals? Your body isn't something you have, it's something you are. When you neglect it, you neglect yourself. And that neglect ages you in ways that no amount of anti-aging cream or cosmetic procedures can reverse. So how do you eliminate this habit? First, you reconnect with your body. Most people who neglect their bodies have become disconnected from them. They live entirely in their heads, treating their bodies as inconvenient vehicles that carry their brains around. Start paying attention to how your body feels. Notice when you're tired, hungry, tense, energized, comfortable, uncomfortable. This awareness is the foundation of care. Second, reframe physical care as self-respect rather than vanity. You're not exercising to look good, although that might be a pleasant side effect. You're exercising to feel strong, capable, alive, to maintain your independence, to keep your brain sharp, because physical activity is one of the most powerful things you can do for cognitive health. You're not eating well to lose weight, although again, that might happen. You're eating well to nourish your cells, support your immune system, give yourself energy, prevent disease. Third, start small and build. If you haven't exercised in years, don't try to run a marathon next week. Start with a 10-minute walk. If your diet consists mainly of processed foods, don't try to overhaul everything overnight. Start by adding one vegetable to one meal. If you stay up until 2 in the morning every night, Don't try to suddenly go to bed at 9. Move your bedtime 30 minutes earlier. Small, consistent changes create lasting transformation far more effectively than dramatic overhauls that you can't sustain. Fourth, find joy in movement and nourishment. If exercise feels like punishment, you won't keep doing it. Find activities you actually enjoy: dancing, swimming, gardening, walking in nature, playing with grandchildren. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it gets you moving and brings you pleasure. Similarly, learn to enjoy healthy food. Experiment with flavors and recipes. Make meal preparation a meditation, a creative act, a gift you give yourself rather than a chore. Fifth, dress your body with love and intention. Wear clothes that fit you now, that make you feel confident and beautiful at your current size and shape. Don't wait until you lose weight or tone up or whatever condition you've set for deserving nice clothes. You deserve to feel good in your body right now, today, as you are. When you dress with care and intention, you send yourself a powerful message. I matter. I'm worth the effort. I'm showing up for my life. And finally, remember that caring for your body is an act of gratitude. Your body has carried you through every moment of your life. It's healed from injuries, fought off illnesses, allowed you to experience pleasure and beauty and connection. It's created life if you've had children. It's hugged people you love. It's danced and laughed and cried and breathed through countless experiences. Even if it's not perfect, even if it's changed, even if it's aging, it deserves your respect and care. When you tend to it with love and attention, you're saying thank you. And that gratitude, that honoring of your physical self, keeps you young in the truest sense. Habit 4, isolating yourself socially. The fourth habit that ages you dramatically is social isolation, and this might be one of the most insidious because it often happens so gradually that you don't notice until you've become profoundly lonely. Human beings are social creatures. We evolved in tribes and communities. Our brains are wired for connection. Our nervous systems regulate through interaction with others. Our sense of self is shaped through our relationships. When we cut ourselves off from meaningful social connection, we don't just feel lonely, we actually begin to deteriorate physically, mentally, and emotionally. Research has shown that loneliness and social isolation are as damaging to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. They increase your risk of heart disease, stroke, dementia, depression, anxiety, and early death. Isolated people have higher levels of stress hormones, more inflammation, weaker immune systems, and accelerated cellular aging. But beyond these physical effects, social isolation ages you in ways that are immediately visible. Isolated people look older, they move older, they think older, they become older. Jorge Bucay teaches that relationships are mirrors in which we see ourselves. When we're engaged with others, sharing ideas, stories, laughter, challenges, we stay dynamic and alive. Other people stimulate us intellectually, challenge our assumptions, introduce us to new perspectives and experiences. They remind us that we're part of something larger than ourselves, that we matter, that our presence has impact. When we withdraw from this engagement, we lose these vital reflections and stimulations. Social isolation often begins innocuously. Maybe you retire and suddenly lose the daily interaction with colleagues. Maybe your children grow up and move away and the house becomes too quiet. Maybe a spouse dies or a relationship ends and you find yourself alone after decades of partnership. Maybe you move to a new place and don't have the energy or confidence to build new friendships. Maybe you've been hurt by people and decide it's safer to keep everyone at a distance. Or maybe, most commonly, life just gets busy and complicated, and maintaining friendships feels like one more thing on an already overwhelming to-do list. So you let them slip away. Whatever the reasons, the result is the same. You start spending more and more time alone. At first, it might even feel peaceful. No one making demands on you, no one to disappoint or be disappointed by. No need to make conversation or be socially appropriate, just you and your routines and your comfortable, familiar solitude. But gradually, something shifts. The peace becomes loneliness. The freedom becomes emptiness. The solitude becomes isolation. And here's what happens when you isolate yourself. You lose the vitality that comes from engagement with life. You stop laughing as much because humor is fundamentally social. You stop learning as much because we learn through exchange of ideas. You stop being challenged because no one's there to challenge you. You stop caring as much about your appearance, your environment, your growth, because there's no one to see you, to notice, to care. Your world shrinks to the size of your living room, your daily routine, your own thoughts circling endlessly. Your conversation skills atrophy. Your social confidence diminishes. You become anxious about interactions that used to be effortless. You develop odd habits and rigid routines because there's no one around to gently redirect you. You lose touch with current culture, current events, current ways of being in the world. You become, in the truest sense, out of touch. And all of this makes you old. I want you to picture two 70-year-old women. One lives alone, rarely leaves her house except for necessary errands, has let her friendships fade, spends her days watching television and doing crossword puzzles, eats the same meals at the same times every day, talks to herself more than to other people. The other also lives alone, but she's part of a book club, takes a weekly dance class, volunteers at a local organization, has regular coffee dates with friends, tries new restaurants, goes to cultural events, stays engaged with her community. Can you see the difference? It's not about their circumstances, it's about their choices. One has allowed isolation to define her life. The other actively maintains connection and engagement. And I guarantee you, the second woman looks, feels, and acts younger, regardless of their actual ages. Eliminating social isolation requires deliberate, consistent effort, especially if you've been isolated for a while. It requires overcoming inertia, fear, and the comfortable numbness that isolation can create. But it's absolutely essential if you want to stay young in any meaningful sense. First, acknowledge the isolation honestly. Many isolated people convince themselves they're fine, they prefer solitude, they're introverted, they don't need people. And while it's true that people have different needs for social interaction, genuine thriving in complete isolation is extremely rare. If you're spending days or weeks without meaningful interaction with another human being, that's not healthy introversion, that's isolation. Be honest with yourself about whether your solitude is truly nourishing or whether it's become a prison. Second, start small and be realistic. If you haven't socialized in months or years, don't expect to suddenly have a vibrant social life next week. Start with one small step. Smile and say hello to a neighbor. Strike up a brief conversation with a cashier. Attend a local event, even if you just observe. Join an online community around an interest you have. The goal isn't immediate deep friendship. It's breaking the pattern of isolation and reminding yourself that human connection is possible and even pleasant. Third, pursue connection through shared activities rather than forced socializing. It's easier to connect with people when you're doing something together, whether that's a class, a hobby group, volunteer work, or a club. The shared focus gives you something to talk about and takes the pressure off trying to be interesting or entertaining. You're just two or more people doing something you enjoy together. Fourth, maintain existing relationships even when it feels hard. If you have any friendships or family connections that are still viable, don't let them slip away out of inertia or discomfort. Make the call, send the message, suggest the coffee date. Yes, it requires effort, especially if you've let too much time pass and feel awkward about reconnecting. Do it anyway. Most people are far more receptive than you imagine. and they're often struggling with the same feelings of disconnection and isolation. Fifth, be the initiator. One of the biggest barriers to connection is waiting for others to reach out, to invite you, to include you. Especially as you get older, people may assume you're busy or not interested, or they don't want to impose. Don't wait for invitations. Create them. Host a small gathering. Organize a group outing. Start a regular walking group or game night. When you take initiative, you not only create connection for yourself, you often fill a need that others have as well. Sixth, embrace technology thoughtfully. Yes, in-person connection is ideal, but virtual connection is infinitely better than no connection. Video calls with distant loved ones, online communities, social media used intentfully to maintain relationships, these can all be valuable. The key is using technology to enhance connection rather than substitute for it or to passively consume content that makes you feel more isolated. And finally, understand that vulnerability is the price of connection. Many people isolate themselves because connection requires risk. Risk of rejection, risk of disappointment, risk of being hurt or let down. And yes, those risks are real. Relationships can be complicated and painful. But isolation guarantees a slow death of the spirit. Connection, even with its risks and challenges, is what makes us alive, what keeps us growing, what maintains our humanity. The oldest, most worn-down people I've known aren't old because of their years. They're old because they've closed themselves off from life and from others. Don't let that be you. Habit 5. Abandoning curiosity and learning. The fifth habit that ages you prematurely is the abandonment of curiosity and the cessation of learning. Think about children. They're endlessly curious. They ask why constantly. They want to know how things work, what things are called, why people do what they do. They're sponges, absorbing information and experiences with enthusiasm and wonder. This curiosity keeps their minds active, flexible, growing. It's a huge part of what makes them seem so alive and vibrant. Now think about people who seem old regardless of their age. Often they've stopped being curious. They've decided they know everything they need to know. They're not interested in new information, new perspectives, new experiences. They've settled into fixed opinions and familiar routines. They've stopped asking questions and started making declarations. They've replaced curiosity with certainty, and that certainty calcifies them. Jorge Bucay has written extensively about the importance of maintaining a beginner's mind, a concept from Zen Buddhism that he's adapted to his therapeutic work. A beginner's mind is one that's open, curious, willing to not know, eager to learn. It's the opposite of the expert mind that believes it's already seen everything, understood everything. Man has nothing more to discover. People with a beginner's mind stay young because they're constantly encountering the world with fresh eyes. People with an expert mind age because they've closed themselves off to novelty and growth. The abandonment of learning happens in stages. First, you finish your formal education and might understandably feel relieved to be done with mandatory learning. That's natural. But then, instead of continuing to learn in ways that interest you, you stop learning altogether. You read the same types of books or stop reading entirely. You watch the same shows. You have the same conversations. You hold the same opinions. Your world becomes familiar, predictable, small. Then, when you encounter something new or unfamiliar, instead of being curious, you're dismissive or even hostile. New technology? Too complicated, I don't need it. New music? Terrible, not like the music I grew up with. New social movements or ideas? Don't understand them, don't want to understand them. Things were better the old way. This dismissiveness isn't wisdom or discernment, it's fear masquerading as superiority. You're afraid of not knowing, of being confused, of being a beginner again, so you reject anything that would put you in that position. Finally, you become rigid in your thinking. You've constructed a worldview, and instead of allowing it to evolve with new information and experiences, you defend it against all challenges. You surround yourself only with information and people that confirm what you already believe. You interpret everything through your existing framework, unable or unwilling to consider that you might be wrong or that there might be more to understand. This rigidity is profoundly aging because growth requires flexibility, and you've made yourself inflexible. The effects of this abandonment are devastating. Cognitively, when you stop learning, your brain literally begins to atrophy. Neuroscience has shown us that the brain remains plastic throughout life, meaning it can form new neural connections, grow new neurons, adapt and change. But this plasticity requires stimulation. When you stop challenging your brain with new information, new skills, new ways of thinking, you lose cognitive capacity. Your memory weakens, your processing speed slows, your ability to solve problems diminishes. You become neurologically old. Emotionally, the loss of curiosity often coincides with increased fear and defensiveness. When you're no longer open to learning, you become threatened by anything that challenges your existing understanding. This creates a fortress mentality where you're constantly defending your beliefs, your way of life, your worldview against perceived attacks. This defensive stance is exhausting and aging. It makes you rigid, reactive, closed off. Socially, people who've stopped learning become boring. They have nothing new to talk about. They repeat the same stories, the same opinions, the same information over and over. Younger people, or anyone who's still growing and curious, find them tedious. This can lead to further isolation as people avoid spending time with someone who's intellectually stagnant. And perhaps most sadly, the abandonment of curiosity means you miss out on the incredible richness that life continues to offer at every age. There's so much to learn, to discover, to explore, to understand. New technologies that could enhance your life, new ideas that could shift your perspective, new skills that could bring you joy, new knowledge that could deepen your understanding of yourself and the world. When you close yourself off to all of this, you impoverish your existence. I've seen this play out countless times. People in their 40s who've already decided they're too old to learn technology, so they struggle with basic tasks that would make their lives easier and feel increasingly alienated in a digital world. People in their 50s who've stopped reading, exploring ideas, engaging with culture, so their conversations become repetitive and stale. People in their 60s who respond to everything new with some version of back in my day, unable to appreciate that the present has its own value and validity. These people haven't just aged chronologically, they've aged mentally and spiritually because they've stopped growing. The alternative is beautiful and available to anyone at any age. It's maintaining or rekindling a sense of wonder and curiosity about life. It's being willing to be a beginner again and again. It's understanding that not knowing isn't a weakness. It's an opportunity. It's staying engaged with the ever-changing world while also deepening your understanding of timeless wisdom. How do you eliminate this habit of intellectual stagnation? First, commit to being a lifelong learner. This doesn't mean going back to school necessarily, although it could. It means making learning a regular, intentional part of your life. Read widely across different subjects and genres. Listen to podcasts or audiobooks about topics you know nothing about. Take online courses, attend lectures or workshops, watch documentaries, engage with ideas that challenge you. Second, cultivate curiosity deliberately. When you encounter something you don't understand, instead of dismissing it, get curious about it. Ask questions, do research, seek to understand before you judge. When you meet someone with a different perspective or background, instead of arguing or withdrawing, ask them to help you understand their viewpoint. Even if you ultimately disagree, The process of trying to understand keeps your mind flexible and open. Third, you learn new skills, especially skills that are difficult or outside your comfort zone. The process of being a beginner, of struggling with something new, of gradually gaining competence, is incredibly rejuvenating. It reminds you that you're capable of growth. It builds new neural pathways. It gives you empathy for others who are learning. It proves that age doesn't have to mean stagnation. Learn a language, learn an instrument, learn to paint or sculpt or write poetry, learn to code, learn to garden. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is the process of learning itself. Fourth, embrace technology rather than resist it. I know this is challenging, especially if you didn't grow up with digital technology. But resisting technology only isolates you further and makes you dependent on others for tasks you could do yourself. You don't need to become an expert, but you should be comfortable with the basic technologies that facilitate modern life. Learn to use your smartphone effectively. Understand social media enough to stay connected with loved ones. Figure out video calling so you can see distant family and friends. These aren't frivolous skills, they're essential tools for connection and independence. Fifth, seek out diverse perspectives and experiences. One of the ways we become intellectually stagnant is by creating echo chambers where everyone thinks like we do. Deliberately expose yourself to different viewpoints, even and especially ones that make you uncomfortable. Read sources from across the political spectrum. Talk to people from different generations, cultures, backgrounds. Travel if you can, and even if it's just to a different neighborhood in your own city. Diversity of input creates richness of thought. And finally, replace "I'm too old to learn" with "I'm excited to learn." Your inner dialogue shapes your reality. If you tell yourself you're too old, your brain will find evidence to support that belief. If you tell yourself you're capable of learning at any age, your brain will rise to that expectation, and the science supports this. Neuroplasticity continues throughout life. People in their 70s and 80s can learn new languages, new instruments, new skills. Your age is not the barrier. Your belief about your age is the barrier. Habit 6. Losing sense of purpose. The sixth habit that ages you is losing your sense of purpose. And this might be the most existentially devastating of all. Purpose is what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's the answer to the question, why am I here? What am I contributing? What difference am I making? Without purpose, life becomes an empty routine, a series of days to get through rather than experiences to embrace. And this purposelessness shows in everything about you, your energy, your posture, your eyes, your entire presence in the world. Jorge Bucay has explored this extensively in his work, particularly the idea that meaning and purpose are not things we find, but things we create. Many people, especially as they age, fall into the trap of waiting for purpose to arrive, waiting for some clear calling or obvious mission. But purpose doesn't work that way. It's something we actively construct through our choices, our commitments, our engagement with life. The loss of purpose often coincides with major life transitions. Retirement is a big one. You've spent decades defining yourself by your work, by your professional identity and contributions. Then suddenly that's gone and you don't know who you are or what you're for. If you haven't cultivated other sources of meaning and purpose, retirement can feel like falling off a cliff into emptiness. Children leaving home is another common trigger. If your entire purpose has been being a parent, being needed by your children, then when they leave and build their own lives, you're left with a void. You've succeeded at your mission, they're independent, but instead of feeling accomplished, you feel obsolete. What do you do with yourself now? Who are you if you're not primarily someone's mother or father? Health challenges can also trigger a crisis of purpose. If your purpose was tied to physical activities or abilities that you've lost, you might feel like you've lost your reason for being. the athlete who can no longer compete, the dancer whose body no longer moves the way it once did, the person whose chronic illness limits what they can do. If purpose was attached to what you could do rather than who you are, losing capabilities can feel like losing everything. But here's what I need you to understand. These crises of purpose aren't actually about the external changes. They're about having built your sense of meaning on too narrow a foundation. If your entire purpose is your job, of course losing your job feels like losing yourself. If your entire purpose is your children, of course their independence feels like your irrelevance. If your entire purpose is your physical capabilities, of course losing them feels like losing your value. When people lose their sense of purpose, they age rapidly and visibly. They lose vitality because they have nothing to be vital for. They lose motivation because they have no reason to make effort. They lose structure because without purpose, why maintain routines or standards or goals? Days blend together in meaningless succession. They might sleep too much or too little, eat too much or too little. Stop caring about their appearance, their home, their relationships. Nothing seems to matter because they've lost sight of what matters. The eyes are particularly telling. People without purpose have what I call dead eyes. The light has gone out. There's no spark, no interest, no engagement. When you talk to them, they're not really present. They're just going through the motions of existing without any real investment in their existence. It's heartbreaking to witness because you can see the person they were, the aliveness that used to animate them, now buried under layers of resignation and emptiness. I want to tell you about a man I knew, Richard, who retired at 65 after a successful career as an engineer. He'd been looking forward to retirement, planning all the things he'd do with his free time. Travel, golf, spend time with grandchildren, work on his house. But when retirement actually came, he quickly discovered that these activities, pleasant as they were, didn't provide the sense of purpose and contribution his career had given him. Golf was fun, but it wasn't meaningful. Traveling was enjoyable, but it didn't fulfill him. So within a year of retirement, Richard looked like he'd aged a decade. He'd lost weight, his posture had deteriorated, he moved slowly and seemed tired all the time. His wife was worried because he spent most of his days sitting in front of the television, something he'd never done before. What Richard was experiencing was a profound purposelessness. His job hadn't just been how he made money, it had been how he made meaning. He'd been solving problems, creating solutions, contributing to projects larger than himself. In retirement, he had nothing equivalent to replace it. He was comfortable, safe, free, and utterly without purpose. And it was killing him, not dramatically, but slowly, day by day, through the cumulative effect of meaningless existence. The transformation came when a former colleague asked him to mentor young engineers through a professional organization. Richard was hesitant at first, thinking he was done with that world. But he agreed to try it. And suddenly, he had purpose again. He was sharing his knowledge, helping younger people avoid mistakes, contributing to the field he'd spent his career in. The change was remarkable. His energy returned, his posture straightened. The light came back into his eyes. He wasn't trying to recapture his career. He was finding a new way to be useful, to contribute, to matter. That's what purpose does. So how do you eliminate the habit of purposelessness? First, understand that purpose isn't one thing, it's many things. You don't need a single grand mission. You need reasons to engage with life. Ways to feel that your existence has value and makes a difference. This can come from relationships, from creative pursuits, from volunteer work, from learning, from mentoring, from contributing to your community, from caring for others or the environment, from countless sources. The key is to actively cultivate multiple sources of meaning so that if one diminishes, you're not left empty. Second, shift from doing to being. Many people, especially those who were very career-focused, define purpose entirely through productivity and achievement. But purpose can also come from who you are and how you show up in the world. Being a kind presence, being someone people can count on, being an example of resilience or grace or wisdom, being a connector who brings people together. These ways of being are purposeful, even when they're not producing tangible results. Third, contribute something. Human beings need to feel useful. We need to know that we're giving something to the world, not just consuming resources and taking up space. This contribution can be volunteer work, helping a neighbor, sharing your skills or knowledge, creating art or beauty, anything that feels like you're adding value rather than just existing. Even small contributions count. Making someone smile, offering good advice, creating something beautiful, caring for an animal or a plant. All of these are meaningful contributions that give your days purpose. Fourth, connect to something larger than yourself. Purpose often comes from feeling part of something bigger, whether that's a family, a community, a cause, a faith tradition, or even nature itself. When you're connected to something larger, your individual life has context and meaning within that larger framework. You're not just living for yourself, you're living as part of this bigger story, and that gives everything you do more significance. Fifth, create rituals and routines that embody your values. One way to maintain purpose is through daily practices that connect you to what matters most. Maybe you start each day with meditation or prayer, grounding yourself in something spiritual. Maybe you end each day writing down what you're grateful for, keeping yourself connected to appreciation. Maybe you have a weekly call with a distant loved one, honoring the value of relationship. These rituals aren't just habits. They're expressions of purpose, daily reminders of what you care about and who you want to be. And finally, remember that purpose can and should evolve throughout your life. The purpose that drove you at 25 doesn't have to be the purpose that drives you at 65. It's natural and healthy for your sources of meaning to shift as you move through different life stages. The key is to actively create new sources of purpose rather than passively accepting purposelessness. Don't wait for purpose to find you. Go out and build it through your choices, your commitments, your engagement with life. Habit 7. Carrying grudges and resentment. The seventh habit that ages you is carrying grudges and resentment, holding onto anger and bitterness about past wrongs, real or perceived. This is one of the most toxic habits you can develop because it poisons not just your relationships, but your entire inner world. And that poison shows on your face, in your body language, in your energy. Bitter people look old. They look worn down. They look hard and closed off because bitterness is a heavy burden that ages you from the inside out. Jorge Bucay has written powerfully about forgiveness, not as something you do for the person who wronged you, but as something you do for yourself. Forgiveness, in his framework, isn't about condoning bad behavior or pretending you weren't hurt. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of resentment. It's about choosing freedom over continued suffering. When you hold a grudge, you're the one who suffers most. You're the one carrying the weight. You're the one reliving the hurt over and over. The person you're angry at might not even know or care, but you're poisoning yourself daily with your own bitterness. Let me paint a picture of what carrying grudges looks like. It's obsessively replaying conversations and confrontations from the past, mentally rehearsing what you should have said, imagining scenarios of revenge or vindication. It's feeling a rush of anger every time you think about the person who wronged you, even if it happened years or decades ago. It's telling the story of how you were mistreated over and over to anyone who will listen, keeping the wound fresh through constant retelling. It's refusing to forgive because you believe forgiveness would somehow mean what happened was okay, or that you're weak, or that they won. It's organizing your life around avoiding the person you're angry at, or if you can't avoid them, treating them with cold hostility. What most people don't realize is that this grudge holding has profound effects on your physical and mental health. Chronic anger and resentment keep your stress response activated. Your cortisol levels stay elevated. Your blood pressure rises. Your immune system weakens. You're literally bathing your cells in stress hormones, accelerating aging at a cellular level. Research has shown that people who hold grudges have higher rates of heart disease, depression, anxiety, and various stress-related illnesses. Your body wasn't designed to maintain constant vigilance against perceived enemies. When you do, it breaks down. But the emotional and spiritual aging might be even worse. Resentment makes you hard. It creates walls around your heart to protect you from further hurt. But these same walls keep out love, joy, connection, all the things that make life worth living. You become suspicious and cynical. You interpret neutral actions as malicious. You can't trust because you're always waiting for the next betrayal. This hardening shows in your face. The soft openness of youth is replaced by the tight, guarded expression of someone who's been hurt and refuses to be hurt again. It's understandable, but it's also tragic, because in protecting yourself from further pain, you've closed yourself off from life. I knew a woman named Susan who spent 20 years angry at her sister over a perceived slight about their mother's estate. The actual amount of money involved was relatively small, but the principle of it, the feeling of being treated unfairly, the resentment about how her sister had handled everything, it consumed Susan. She refused to speak to her sister. She wouldn't attend family events if her sister would be there. She talked about it constantly, always finding a way to bring the conversation around to how she'd been wronged. Her children begged her to let it go, to reconcile with her aunt. But Susan wore her grudge like a badge of honor, as if her refusal to forgive proved her integrity. The years of this anger showed on Susan. She developed deep frown lines. Her mouth turned down at the corners. Her shoulders were perpetually tense. She looked bitter because she was bitter. And the terrible irony was that her sister, the object of all this resentment, had moved on years ago and rarely thought about the conflict that was poisoning Susan's life. Susan wasn't hurting her sister with her grudge. She was destroying herself. The breakthrough came when Susan had a health scare, a heart issue that required surgery. Facing her mortality, she suddenly saw how much time and energy she'd wasted on resentment. She realized she might die having spent 20 years angry at her sister over something that, in the grand scheme of her life, was trivial. She reached out. They reconciled. It was awkward and emotional, but also healing. And Susan described feeling like a weight had been lifted, like she could breathe fully for the first time in decades. She looked different afterward, softer, younger, free. Here's what I need you to understand about grudges and resentment. Holding onto them doesn't punish the person who wronged you. It punishes you. It doesn't prove you're right. It proves you're trapped. It doesn't protect you from future hurt. It guarantees continued suffering from past hurt. Every moment you spend in resentment is a moment you could have spent in peace, in joy, in presence with people who love you. But instead, you're mentally and emotionally living in the past, in the wound, in the story of how you were wronged. Eliminating this habit requires deep inner work, but it's absolutely essential if you want to age with grace and lightness rather than bitterness and weight. First, you have to understand what forgiveness actually is and isn't. Forgiveness is not saying what happened was okay. It's not forgetting. It's not necessarily reconciling with the person who hurt you or allowing them back into your life. Forgiveness is releasing your attachment to the story of being wronged. It's choosing to stop poisoning yourself with resentment. It's deciding that your peace is more important than your grievance. Second, recognize that most grudges are actually about you, not the other person. Often we're angry not just because of what someone did, but because of what it meant about us. They betrayed us, which meant we were gullible. They rejected us, which meant we weren't worthy. They disrespected us, which meant we were weak. The hurt isn't just about their actions. It's about the story we told ourselves, about what their actions said about us. Healing requires separating what actually happened from the meaning you've assigned to it. Third, practice empathy and perspective taking. This doesn't mean excusing bad behavior, but it does mean recognizing that hurt people hurt people. The person who wronged you was almost certainly acting from their own pain, fear, limitation, or confusion. Yet they weren't necessarily targeting you specifically or trying to destroy you. They were being human, flawed, and imperfect, and sometimes hurtful. When you can see their actions through this wider lens, it's easier to release the personal resentment. Fourth, write a forgiveness letter that you never send. This is a powerful therapeutic technique. Write to the person who hurt you. Tell them everything you need to say, all the anger and hurt and disappointment. Don't hold back. Then, in the same letter or in a second one, write your forgiveness. I forgive you for what you did. I release myself from carrying this pain. I choose peace over resentment. You don't have to mean it completely when you write it. The act of writing it begins to shift something inside you. Then destroy the letter. This is for you, not for them. Fifth, redirect your energy from resentment to growth. Every time you find yourself dwelling on a grudge, consciously shift your attention to something constructive. What can you learn from this experience? How can you protect yourself better in the future without building walls? What positive actions can you take today that would make your life better? Use the energy you've been pouring into anger and channel it into building something good. And finally, remember that forgiveness is a process, not a single decision. You might forgive and then find yourself angry again. That's normal. Keep choosing forgiveness. Keep releasing the resentment. Over time, it gets easier. The charge diminishes. The story loses its power. You'll know you've truly forgiven when you can think about what happened without that rush of anger. When you can wish the person well or at minimum feel neutral about them. That's freedom. That's what allows you to move forward light and young and alive, rather than weighted down by the past. Habit 8. Neglecting dreams and passions. The 8th habit that ages you is neglecting your dreams and passions, letting the fire inside you go out, settling for a life of routine and responsibility without joy, creativity, or aspiration. This is perhaps the saddest form of aging because it's about dying on the inside while your body is still alive. When you abandon your dreams, when you give up on the things that make you feel truly alive, you become a shell going through the motions of existence without any real vitality or purpose. Jorge Bucay speaks often about the importance of desire, not in the sense of greed or constant wanting, but in the sense of having things you care about, things you're reaching for, things that light you up inside. He points out that many people, as they age, convince themselves that having desires or dreams is childish or unrealistic. They tell themselves to be practical, to accept reality, to stop wanting things they probably can't have, and in doing so, they kill the very spark that makes life worth living. This abandonment of dreams often happens gradually. Maybe you had creative aspirations when you were young. You wanted to be an artist, a musician, a writer, but life happened. You needed to make money, support yourself or a family. So you got a practical job, and the creative pursuits became hobbies, then occasional activities, then things you used to do but don't anymore. Maybe you had travel dreams, places you wanted to see, the experiences you wanted to have. But you put them off until you had more money, more time, until the kids were grown, until you retired. And by the time those conditions were met, you'd lost the energy or courage or belief that those dreams were still possible. Maybe you had relationship dreams, hopes for a passionate partnership, deep connection, adventure with someone you love. But you settled for less than that because finding the right person seemed unlikely, or you were afraid of being alone, or you convinced yourself that passion and romance are for young people, and at your age, you should be practical and grateful for companionship. Or maybe you're not in a relationship at all, and you've given up on the dream of love, deciding you're too old, too damaged, too set in your ways. Whatever the specific dreams were, the pattern is the same. You had desires, aspirations, things that called to something deep inside you, and instead of honoring them, pursuing them, making room for them in your life, you dismissed them as impractical, unrealistic, or age inappropriate. You chose safety over passion, routine over adventure, resignation over hope, and every time you made that choice, you aged a little more. The effects are devastating. When you abandon your passions, you lose vitality. You're just going through the motions, doing what you're supposed to do, but there's no enthusiasm, no energy, no joy in it. You become gray, in spirit if not yet in appearance. Your days blend together in unchanging routine. Nothing excites you, nothing moves you, nothing makes you feel truly alive. You also lose yourself. So your dreams and passions are expressions of who you authentically are, what matters to you, what makes you unique. When you abandon them, you abandon yourself. You become a collection of roles and responsibilities: mother, father, employee, spouse, whatever functions you perform. But the essential you, the person with desires and dreams and creative impulses, that person is buried under layers of practicality and resignation. And you lose hope, which might be the most aging loss of all. Hope is what orients us toward the future. It's the belief that good things are still possible, that life can still surprise and delight us, that there are experiences worth looking forward to. When you abandon your dreams, you abandon hope. You settle into the belief that the best parts of your life are behind you, and all that's left is to manage the decline as gracefully as possible. That's a profoundly old way of being, regardless of your chronological age. I think of my friend Margaret, who spent 30 years working in accounting, a job she was good at but didn't love. What she loved was pottery. She'd taken classes in college and had been genuinely talented, but pottery didn't pay the bills, so it became a hobby. Then the hobby became something she did occasionally. Then something she thought about doing but never got around to. Then something she used to do. By the time she was in her 50s, Margaret hadn't touched clay in over a decade. She told herself it was fine, it was just a youthful interest, she needed to be practical. But something in Margaret looked defeated. There was no light in her eyes. She moved through life heavily, dutifully, doing what needed to be done, but clearly not enjoying any of it. Her friends worried about her. She seemed depressed, though she insisted she was fine. When I asked her what she dreamed about, what she wanted, she looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "I don't dream anymore," she said. "I'm too old for that." The shift came when Margaret's company downsized and she lost her job. It was terrifying at first, the loss of income and structure and identity, but it was also an opening. With suddenly abundant time and the need to figure out what came next, Margaret tentatively signed up for a pottery class. It had been so long she wasn't even sure she'd remember how. But the moment she sat at the wheel and felt clay in her hands again, something inside her woke up. It was like coming home to a part of herself she'd forgotten existed. Within months, Margaret looked like a different person. There was light in her eyes. She moved with energy and purpose. She smiled genuinely, not the polite social smile she'd been wearing for years. She was pursuing her passion, even though she was in her 50s, even though she wasn't making money from it, even though it was impractical. And it made her young in the truest sense. Not young in years, but young in spirit, alive and engaged and full of possibility. Here's what you need to understand. Your dreams and passions aren't frivolous extras that you should abandon when life gets serious. They're essential nutrients for your soul. They're what make you you. They're what give your life texture and meaning and joy. Abandoning them doesn't make you mature or realistic, it makes you diminished. And reclaiming them doesn't make you foolish or immature, it makes you alive. How do you eliminate this habit of dream abandonment? First, reconnect with what you've abandoned. What did you used to love? What made you feel alive, creative, passionate? What dreams did you once have that you've dismissed as impossible or impractical? Write them down. Don't censor yourself. Don't immediately jump to all the reasons why these things are no longer possible. Just reconnect with the desires themselves. Second, separate realistic assessment from limiting beliefs. Yes, some dreams from your youth may genuinely not be possible now. If you dreamed of being a professional athlete and you're 70 with arthritis, that specific dream may not be achievable. But the essence of that dream, maybe it was about physical mastery or competition or being part of a team. That essence can still be pursued in age-appropriate ways. The question isn't, can I achieve the exact dream I had at 20? It's, what does this dream represent and how can I honor that now? Third, make room for your passions, even in small ways. You don't have to quit your job and completely upend your life to pursue what you love. Start with an hour a week. Find a class. Join a group. Create a space in your home for your creative pursuit. The key is to stop relegating your passions to someday and start honoring them now, today, in whatever way is possible. Fourth, stop waiting for perfect conditions. You'll never have enough time, enough money, enough skill, enough confidence, enough anything if you're waiting for perfect. Start where you are with what you have. Pursue your passion imperfectly, awkwardly, messily. The point isn't to be great at it immediately. The point is to engage with something you love. Fifth, surround yourself with people who support your dreams rather than diminish them. Some people, often out of their own fear or resignation, will try to talk you out of pursuing your passions. They'll tell you to be realistic, to act your age, to focus on what's practical. These people, however well-intentioned, are toxins to your dreams. Find people who encourage you, who celebrate your passions, who believe in your possibilities. Their support will help you believe in yourself. And finally, understand that it's never too late. Never. There are countless examples of people who achieved their dreams, pursued their passions, created meaningful work in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and beyond. Grandma Moses started painting in her 70s. Laura Ingalls Wilder published her first book at 64. Colonel Sanders founded KFC in his 60s. These aren't exceptions. They're proof that age is not the barrier we think it is. The only real barrier is giving up on yourself. Don't do that. Your dreams matter. Your passions matter. You matter. Act accordingly. Habit 9. Forgetting to play. The ninth and final habit that ages you, and perhaps the most overlooked, is forgetting to play. When was the last time you did something purely for the joy of it, with no purpose beyond enjoyment? When did you last laugh until your stomach hurt? When did you last feel the pure delight of doing something fun without worrying about productivity or achievement or what anyone else might think? For most adults, especially those who identify as old, the answer is, it's been far too long. Play is one of the first casualties of aging, not chronological aging, but the psychological process of becoming old in your mind and heart. Children play naturally and constantly. It's how they learn, how they connect, how they experience joy. But somewhere in the process of becoming an adult, most people stop playing. They decide that play is for children, that adults need to be serious, productive, responsible. Fun becomes something you have to earn through work, and even then it's often tinged with guilt or justification. I deserve this because I worked hard. I can have fun, but only after I've completed my responsibilities. Jorge Bucay has spoken about the importance of play as a form of freedom and authentic self-expression. When you play, you're not performing for anyone or trying to achieve anything. You're simply being, experiencing, enjoying. This unself-conscious engagement with life is profoundly rejuvenating. It's impossible to feel old when you're genuinely playing because play is the essence of youth. But most adults have forgotten how to play. They've made their lives entirely about productivity, responsibility, and goal achievement. Every activity has to have a purpose, a benefit, a justification. Exercise isn't for the joy of movement, it's to lose weight or stay healthy. Reading isn't for pleasure, it's to learn something useful. Even vacations become exhausting itineraries of sights to see and experiences to check off a list rather than opportunities for genuine rest and play. This loss of play ages you in multiple ways. Physiologically, play reduces stress hormones, boosts immune function, and triggers the release of endorphins and other feel-good chemicals. When you stop playing, you lose these benefits. You become more stressed, more serious, more burdened. Psychologically, play allows for creativity, spontaneity, and joy. Without it, life becomes heavy, rigid, dutiful. You lose the lightness and spontaneity that makes people seem young and alive. Socially, play creates connection and warmth. Think about the difference between a formal dinner party where everyone's on their best behavior versus a casual gathering where people are laughing, telling stories, maybe playing games. Which one feels more alive? Which one makes you feel younger? Play dissolves barriers and creates genuine connection in ways that serious, careful interaction never can. And spiritually, play reminds you that life isn't only about struggling and achieving. It's also about enjoying, experiencing, being present with what is. When you forget this, when everything becomes work and responsibility and duty, you lose the sense that life itself is a gift to be savored, not just a challenge to be endured. I've watched this play out so many times. Successful, accomplished people who've spent decades building careers, raising families, meeting responsibilities, who wake up one day and realize they can't remember the last time they had genuine fun. They've been so focused on doing everything right, being responsible, meeting obligations that they've forgotten how to simply enjoy themselves. And it shows. They're tight, controlled, serious. They smile with their mouths, but not their eyes. They've lost the capacity for spontaneous joy. Consider Thomas, a man I knew who retired after a demanding career in law. He'd spent 40 years being serious, analytical, careful. Every decision was weighed. Every action was deliberate. He was successful, respected, accomplished. But he was also exhausted and joyless. In retirement, he initially tried to structure his days the same way he'd structured his work life. Goals, schedules, achievements. He'd exercise for exactly 45 minutes, read serious literature for 1 hour, work on improving his golf game with the focus of someone preparing for the Olympics. Everything was purposeful and measured. Nothing was playful. His wife, frustrated with his inability to relax and enjoy life, finally convinced him to take an improv comedy class. Thomas thought it was ridiculous. He wasn't funny. He didn't like performing, but he went to make his wife happy. And something unexpected happened. In improv, you can't be careful and controlled. You have to be spontaneous, vulnerable, willing to look foolish. You have to play. And for the first time in decades, Thomas remembered what it felt like to do something purely for fun, without any goal beyond enjoyment. The transformation was remarkable. Thomas started laughing more, genuinely laughing, not the polite chuckle he'd perfected for professional settings. He loosened up. He became more spontaneous. He started suggesting silly activities. Let's go to the arcade. Let's try that new escape room. Let's rent kayaks. His wife said he seemed 20 years younger, and he did. Not because his body had changed, but because he'd reconnected with the playful part of himself that he'd buried under decades of seriousness and responsibility. Here's what you need to understand. Play isn't a luxury or an indulgence. It's a human need, as essential as sleep or nutrition or social connection. When you neglect it, you diminish yourself. When you embrace it, you rejuvenate yourself. The good news is that play is always available to you if you're willing to give yourself permission. How do you eliminate the habit of playlessness? First, you have to overcome the internal critic that says, play is frivolous, childish, or a waste of time. This critic is often very strong in people who've been socialized to be productive and responsible above all else. You have to recognize that this voice isn't wisdom, it's fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of not being productive enough. Fear of enjoying yourself when there are still problems to solve. Challenge this voice. Ask it, who says I can't play? Who decided that adults must be serious all the time? The answer is other overly serious adults who've also forgotten how to play. Don't let their limitation become yours. Second, rediscover what play means to you. Play looks different for different people. For some, it's physical games or sports. For others, it's creative activities like drawing or making music. For some, it's wordplay and humor. For others, it's imaginative activities or storytelling. Don't think you have to play the way children play, though you certainly can if that appeals to you. Think about what activities make you lose track of time, what makes you laugh, what feels joyful and engaging rather than dutiful and goal-oriented. Third, schedule play the same way you schedule work or responsibilities. This might seem contradictory, scheduling something that should be spontaneous. But for people who've forgotten how to play, you need to intentionally create space for it, or it will never happen. Block out time for fun. Protect it the way you protect important work meetings. This isn't being rigid. It's recognizing that if you don't prioritize play, it will always be crowded out by things that seem more important. Fourth, play with others. Play is often more enjoyable and easier when shared. Find people who enjoy playfulness. Join a recreational sports league, take a dance class, play board games with friends or family. Go to a comedy show. The social element makes play feel more legitimate and also more fun. You give each other permission to be silly and spontaneous. Fifth, lower the stakes. One reason adults don't play is they've made everything competitive or performance-based. They can't just play golf, they have to improve their handicap. They can't just sing, they have to be good at it. This achievement orientation kills the playful spirit. Instead, do things purely for enjoyment, with no goal beyond having fun. Be bad at things, make mistakes, look foolish, laugh at yourself. That's play. And finally, notice how play makes you feel. When you do engage in genuine play, pay attention to the lightness it brings, the joy, the sense of being alive and present. This positive feedback will motivate you to make play a regular part of your life rather than an occasional indulgence. You'll start to see that the time you spend playing isn't wasted, it's essential. It's what makes all the work and responsibility bearable and meaningful. So there you have it. 9 habits that age you prematurely, often without you even noticing. Complaining constantly instead of choosing empowered responses. Living in the past instead of embracing the present. Neglecting your body instead of honoring it with care. Isolating yourself socially instead of maintaining meaningful connections. Abandoning curiosity and learning instead of staying engaged with growth. Losing your sense of purpose instead of actively creating meaning. carrying grudges and resentment instead of choosing forgiveness and freedom, neglecting your dreams and passions instead of pursuing what makes you feel alive, and forgetting to play instead of maintaining the joy and spontaneity that keeps you young. Each of these habits on its own can make you look and feel decades older than you are. Together, they create a life that's heavy, joyless, static, and old. But here's the beautiful truth: every single one of these habits can be changed. You're not stuck with them. You're not sentenced to a life of premature aging. Every day, in countless small choices, you have the opportunity to choose differently, to choose vitality over resignation, growth over stagnation, connection over isolation, joy over bitterness, life over mere existence. Jorge Bucay teaches us that aging is inevitable, but how we age is a choice. We can age with grace, curiosity, openness, and joy. Or we can age with bitterness, rigidity, fear, and resignation. The difference isn't in our genetics or our circumstances, though those play a role. The difference is in our daily habits, our responses to life, our choices about how we show up in the world. I want you to take a moment right now and reflect honestly. Which of these 9 habits are you struggling with? Maybe you recognized yourself in several of them. That's okay. Awareness is the first step to change. You can't transform what you don't acknowledge. So be honest with yourself about where you're allowing these aging habits to take root in your life. And then choose one habit to work on, just one. Don't try to fix everything at once. That's overwhelming and often leads to giving up. Pick the habit that resonates most strongly, or that you think would make the biggest difference in your life if you changed it. And commit to taking one small step toward eliminating that habit this week. Not tomorrow, not someday. This week. If it's complaining, maybe your step is to start a gratitude journal and write 3 things you're grateful for each day. If it's living in the past, maybe your step is to plan one new experience, something you've never done before. If it's body neglect, maybe your step is to take a 20-minute walk 3 times this week. If it's social isolation, maybe your step is to reach out to an old friend you've been meaning to call. If it's abandoning curiosity, maybe your step is to check out a book on a topic you know nothing about. If it's losing purpose, maybe your step is to volunteer for one afternoon at a local organization. If it's holding grudges, maybe your step is to write that forgiveness letter we talked about. If it's neglecting dreams, maybe your step is to spend 30 minutes this week doing something you used to love. If it's forgetting to play, maybe your step is to do something purely for fun, with no goal beyond enjoyment. One small step, but that step taken consistently leads to another step and another. And before you know it, you've created a new pattern, a new way of being. You've chosen youth over age, vitality over resignation, life over mere existence. Remember, true youth isn't about the number of years you've been alive. It's about the energy you bring to life. It's about staying curious, connected, purposeful, and engaged. It's about caring for yourself and others. It's about releasing bitterness and embracing joy. It's about pursuing what matters to you and playing along the way. These aren't things reserved for the young. These are choices available to anyone at any age who's willing to make them. You are not your age. You are not your past. You are not your current habits. You are the choices you make every single day about how you want to show up in this life. Choose wisely. Choose vitality. Choose growth. Choose connection. Choose joy. Choose to be truly alive, regardless of how many birthdays you've celebrated. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this resonated with you, if it gave you insights, or inspired you to make changes, please show your support. Like this video so more people can find this message. Comment below and tell me which habit you're going to work on first, or share your own experience with staying young in spirit. I love hearing from you, and your stories inspire others in this community. Share this video with someone you care about who might need this reminder. Subscribe to the Heart Code if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss our conversations about living with authenticity, purpose, and heart. And if you really want to support this channel, if you appreciate the time and care that goes into creating these deep, meaningful conversations, consider showing your gratitude with super thanks. Your support, whether it's a like, a comment, or a financial contribution, makes it possible for us to keep creating content that transforms lives. You're not just supporting a YouTube channel, you're supporting a community of people committed to growth, connection, and living fully at every age. Remember, it's never too late to choose differently. It's never too late to reclaim your vitality, your dreams, your joy. It's never too late to become who you truly are beneath all the habits and patterns that have accumulated over the years. You are capable of extraordinary transformation, regardless of your age. Don't let anyone, including that voice in your own head, tell you otherwise. Until next time, take care of yourself. Honor your body, your heart, your dreams, your connections. Stay curious, stay playful, stay engaged with life. And remember, aging is inevitable, but how you age is entirely up to you. Choose wisely, choose life, choose youth in the truest sense. I'll see you in the next video.